Asad Umar, Pakistan's planning minister and head of the NCOC, gave dire warnings that Pakistan's corona cases will reach 300,000 by the end of June and may be predicted to go up to 1.2 million by July. To assess the significance of these numbers, I have with me prominent TV anchor and political commentator, Dr. Moeed Pirzada. Moeed, thank you so much for joining me.
Well, thanks for inviting me.
Earlier today, we also saw numbers coming out from Imperial College. Newspapers reported that Imperial College had predicted by August the 10th, Pakistan will have close to 80,000 cases per day, and that will be the high point before we start going down. Do you think the government, what do you think of the government's management of corona so far?
Okay, before I actually go toward the government's management, let me address the Imperial College study. I tried looking into the Imperial College reference on Pakistan, but I have not been able to find the exact reference in any British publication or from the Imperial College site itself. The Imperial College original prediction of the model came in the end of March, when they had predicted if the governments across Western Europe and North America or the worldwide did not make serious interventions in the form of the partial lockdowns or complete lockdowns, then 40 million people, according to the statistical model, could have died in the year 2020. It is believed that it is the belief in this model's accuracy or the fear of the projections in the model that led the Boris Johnson government in Britain do with a complete lockdown and shutdown, which they are now relaxing. And the model predicts that several 100,000 people could have died in Britain if serious interventions were not made. As of now, despite the serious interventions, almost 42,000 people in Britain have died, but now the death rate is less than 100 a day.
So are you saying that these numbers are probably too high for Pakistan as well?
Yes, the numbers are probably too high because the model has the assumption, this model makes the assumption that people are personally, on an individual level, the people and the families and the cities are not really doing anything. They're just, being a victim of the corona pandemic. But let me also correct you that the model predicts, which has been reported by Pakistani publications like the News International, the English newspaper, the Geo television site, which actually says that on 10th of August, which will be the peak day of deaths in Pakistan, almost 80,000 people would die in Pakistan. And if nothing is done, then by January, 2.2 million people would have died in Pakistan, and then the death rate would start to come down. But certain things are not clear in the model.
I think there's my understanding actually is, and I did check this because I wanted to confirm, it's 80,000 per day deaths on August the 10th. So I specifically checked this.
Yeah, 80,000 deaths. It's not the case. It's the deaths, 80,000 deaths in a single day. This is what my understanding is.
Right. Yeah. Sorry. So that same as mine.
Yeah, but the strange thing is that the Imperial College London study argues that if Pakistan makes interventions, then the total deaths would be 10,000, 11,000, which looks very strange because at the same time, the published data says, I have seen it in the Pakistani papers, that without interventions, 14 million people could die in India, and with interventions, only 13 million people would die. That also looks strange, that what is the nature and quality of the intervention? As of now, less than 10,000, between 9 to 10,000 people have died in India. India has imposed a very strict lockdown from which it is now easing out. So it's a very mixed picture.
Okay,
Pakistan NCOC, on the other hand, is perhaps my understanding is relying upon its own projections. When Asad Umar speaks of 300,000 cases by the end of June and 1.2 million cases by the end of July, if precautions are not observed by the public, he's not relying upon the Imperial College study. He's relying upon the projections done by the scientists and experts within the NCOC, which is under his command.
So the quality of intervention that we've done in Pakistan, do you think we will get much less deaths therefore happening? What is your evaluation on the quality of intervention done by Pakistan?
My personal thinking is that the Prime Minister Imran Khan's government could not adopt an effective and meaningful communication strategy because of the fault lines between the federal government and the PTP government in the Sindh. The Pakistani argument remained between either complete lockdown or between not a lockdown, right? The Prime Minister initially kept on arguing for a smart lockdown, but Pakistan has never been able to impose even a smart lockdown. If you see that we have started experiencing the initial cases somewhere in February, and of course people were infected even before the initial cases. So we were very slow, and we were moving in slow motion in terms of even stopping the places of congregation. One of the biggest places of congregation were of course the schools, the colleges, the universities, public transport. But while we were quick in imposing a lockdown on schools, colleges, and universities, we were not able to impose a complete shutdown on madrasas, the mosques, the Tablighi Jamaat congregation.
Why were we not able to do that when across the world, Muslim countries have been able to do that? For example, Saudi Arabia, we know, closed down its mosques, then reopened them several weeks later, and then recently closed them down again when they saw that their level of deaths or level of infections was going up again. Why has the Pakistani government not been able to do this?
I think this is a very relevant question for Pakistani governments, political parties, intelligentsia, Pakistani establishment. This is a high point to raise this issue, that when the whole Muslim world, countries like Saudi Arabia, UAE, Dubai, Turkey, Morocco, all the countries and the Muslim diasporas across the world were coming down very hard and were shutting down the mosques, and the religious establishments were also cooperating. Within Pakistan, we have seen that the state has been peculiarly and singularly weak. So the Pakistani state has demonstrated its weakness when it comes to religious lobbies and religious groups. So shutting down the mosques was a very difficult decision. Pakistani government didn't have the courage. They kept on relying upon the various kind of pronouncements and judgments from Jamiatul Azhar in Egypt, or they were referring to Saudi Arabia. They didn't have the moral courage or the executive authority to tell the Pakistani religious people, establishments and clergy that, look, this is a pandemic. You know, Islam is very strict in terms of deciding with the pandemics. And here is Islamabad and Lahore and Karachi have decided this is how we're going to deal with the mosque. So while they were strict in dealing with the school, the college and the university, which they had to, but they were very, very slow. And even now, my understanding is this, that, you know, after Eid and even before Eid in the last days of Ramadan, all the mosques are full. There are no real SOPs. Maybe in some mosques, there are SOPs, but by and large, there are no SOPs. The social distancing and all that. And all what we see is in cities like Islamabad, defense housing authorities, Bahria towns and cantonment areas, and outside these very high enclaves of upper middle class educated communities in Pakistan, there is no real social distancing.
We have seen, for example, in India, a video went viral that we've all seen about policemen beating several people as they're coming out of a temple because they were not following the precautions. And we've seen similar situation in Bangladesh as well. But what is the other part of the communication strategy that the government has failed to give the message to the average person?
Let me make a comment on the India thing. Whereas we were very quick in condemning the Indian government or Hindutva or RSS's attitude towards Muslims during the pandemic lockdown, and even the liberal left has been criticizing the Indian government or the Indian society for this, they have been equally harsh and equally strong in coming down on the temples and the churches, right? And they have been beating people who are not observing the SOPs. Muslims in South Asia have somehow or the other found it difficult to grasp the challenge of the pandemic, and that is why, of course, the Hindutva and the RSS and BJP have their prejudices towards the Muslims. Now, coming down to the communication strategy, if you know,
communication strategy. When you mentioned the Muslims of South Asia, a thought came to my mind. Is it because of the lack of education, and that, of course, is then working into your communication strategy as well? Because Muslims all over South Asia are the least educated in their respective populations.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, the education mired in terms of school and college or university degrees is also, the statistics are very poor among the Muslims in South Asia. But also there is a term called effective education. I think even when people have the school and college education and degree and certification, the effective education and a worldview and a balanced worldview is missing. For instance, people in English have been writing on Twitter in Pakistan, and so many people have been saying otherwise, that the the specter of the death and the images of the people being buried in mass graves in New York is not true. This is some sort of propaganda by the American establishment. This is in fact a conspiracy. This has been said, this has been written. So if there are people, if there are dozens of people or hundreds of people who could think like this way, that means across the Pakistani hinterland and peripheral areas in small town and the villages, people have never really believed in the threat of the corona pandemic. And the government, because of the peculiar political tussle between the Sindh and the federal government, and when the prime minister appearing after every 3 or 4 days and making a judgment and saying that, I don't really believe in complete lockdowns, but I am actually going along with it. And then the Sindh government continuously saying, no, the government has failed. So there was a sort of a political tussle and confrontation on that very vital issue of public health, in which the large majority of the public has felt that there's no real threat. So the government has not been able to effectively communicate. Now, let me give you an example to make the point clear. Unless I give this example, it would not become clear to the people's mind what is effective communication strategy. Why do you have public hangings? What is public hanging? What is burning at the stake? What was the Roman crucifixion for the rebels? The point is, there were state authorities or the religious authorities that wanted to effectively communicate through making an example, right? That, if you do this, if you rebel against the state, this is how, or against the clergy, this is how we're going to deal with you. Or if you murder someone with intention, you can be hanged in public. I mean, these are also communication strategies. In case of Pakistan, the federal government and the political governments they have been saying the right things, but they have not been able to adopt a communication strategy for the lesser educated people of Pakistan. I remember one of the PTI member, Nadeem Afzal Chand, basically told his servant that thousands of people, thousands of people have died. That was the effective communication strategy when he was telling his subordinate or his servant that you can't have a public meeting because thousands of people are dead and the government is not telling the truth. That was a crude example of communication strategy. So the federal government of Pakistan, the Imran Khan government, has not been able to carve up an effective communication strategy to frighten the people of Pakistan across the country. The corona pandemic is a threat to your life.
And it didn't help that the Supreme Court made a judgment as well and gave an announcement that we should go to the markets to buy our new clothes for Eid.
Unfortunately, those comments came before the Eid, and that also looked very political, that at the time when the federal government had made up its mind to open up the shopping malls and the markets before the Eid, perhaps the pressure was coming from the business community that wanted to take the pre-Eid sentiment for shopping to kickstart the economy. I can understand that, and we have seen the figures that how 32 or 33 billion rupees of shopping took place in 3 days. But Supreme Court jumped in with very unscientific observations and comments, which were then used by PTI against the Sindh government, saying that look how the comments of the Supreme Court of Pakistan have vindicated our position on the corona pandemic, on the lockdown. I think this all was very unfortunate. And then in the last week or 10 days, we have seen that with the specter of 100 people or more than 100 people dying every day, the Supreme Court itself was trying to distance itself with its previous wisdom by saying the government should take it seriously.
I'd just like to go slightly forward on this point. One thing that has personally disappointed me is that this was an opportunity in which regional leaders could have got together and worked on this together. But we saw nothing to that effect. We didn't see India, Pakistan, Bangladesh talk about this at all. And what are your feelings on that?
Exactly the same. I fully agree with you. And I also seen your interview discussion with Haroon Sharif, the ex-chairman, Board of Investment and SECP. He basically picked up this point that, there was no global leadership. There was no real global cooperation between, for instance, China that was exporting all the important medical wear to fight corona, and United States that kept on hard on WHO and shutting down the funds. Similarly, within Pakistan, we have seen a failure of political cooperation between Sindh and the federal government, between the federal government and the opposition parties. And within South Asia, where the challenge was exactly the same, given the genetic makeup of the people of South Asia and given the demography of the population, where almost 65% of population in India and Pakistan is less than 35 years of age, and they had similar challenges, similar level of immunity, similar level of resistance. Our ability to transfer the disease, our ability to fall victim and having symptoms was less as compared to the populations, geriatric populations in North America and Western Europe. But there had been absolutely no cooperation between India and Pakistan. Then I asked the Pakistan Health Authority, who's actually advising the government. He said, yes, we are reading the reports on the net. So there has been no meaningful dialogue and communication between Delhi and Islamabad on this important issue to this day.
With your final point, if you could just tell me, what do you think the government needs to do now? Just quick, brief, 1 or 2 points.
I think the government needs to implement now the smart lockdown in its true spirit, which government is doing, like punishing the institutions and the factories or the businesses which are not cooperating. It needs to find the people. It needs to come up with a very, very brilliant communication through media and social media in which the people are forced to observe the principle of social distancing, wearing the masks, staying at a distance from each other in the queues, and coming up with a strategy for the mosques, the madrasas. Mosques is very important. Once again, there is no SOP for the mosques. And the moment you mention this, someone like me, takes up the courage to mention this, the religious people get very upset and angry, and they can blame you for blasphemy and for not respecting the religion. But mosques has been a very weak point in the government strategy. And the second is the public transport. We really have to come up with a strategy for the mosque and the public transport.
We thank you so much for your time today. I do want to bother you again later this week. A lot is going on in the Middle East, and I know you have a keen interest in that area, so I hope you will join me again.
I look forward to that. Thank you.
Thank you.